In this video, I'm going to show you my process on how I control low end in a mix. But before we get started, my name is Ed, you're watching Stokes Sounds, and if you like this video, please make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe and leave a comment. And if you want to support the channel, head over to our website, stokessounds.com. Now let's dive in. So I've got a track here. We're just going to play the instrumental just for the demonstrational purposes, and we're going to look at the low end and how I controlled it. But let's actually just have a listen to the instrumental so we know what we're working with. So, you can hear it's all about the kick, the snare, and there's like two bass lines. If we take a look, you can see here, we've got two bass lines going on, but we'll look at that in further detail. But there are three kind of key elements that I use when I'm controlling low end. First being is a multi-band compressor, and that's just so I can control kind of between 0 and around 130 hertz, just taming that bass and that kick. The second thing is soothe. I'm using kind of the new Jason Joshua technique where he sidechains the kick to the bass. So this sidechain on the soothe is just kind of really ducking every time that kick hits. It's kind of ducking the bass and it's allowing room for them both to work together, which is really cool, and I've been doing that a lot lately. And then the third thing that I do is I use multi-band on the mix bus as well, and again that's just controlling the low end and making sure that it kind of massages into the mix nicely. So if we actually just listen to the kick drum in solo so we can actually hear what the kick sounds like. So, it's quite a thumpy kick, and if we have a look at the processing that I've done on it, I've just used some EQ, very standard for me to use this kind of EQ, just filtering out some kind of really kind of lows end that is just not needed and going to eat up the headroom, filtering out around 86 hertz, and that would have probably been due to some sort of bass frequency that I felt like was causing an issue. And then, around 379, 606 hertz, that kind of boxiness around the kick drum. Now sometimes it's around 300 hertz, which is obviously very popular to take out, but in this instance it was kind of a little bit higher up. And then we've got around 1.3k hertz as well, and that's just kind of the clickiness of the kick. Now sometimes I'll boost that frequency and then sometimes I'll take it away. It just kind of depends on where the kick is sitting in the mix, the kind of the genre, but that was the EQ move on that. So if we just kind of get rid of all of the other plugins and just have a listen with this EQ on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. So, you can hear there, it's just cleaning it up and it's just making the overall kind of kick tone just sound a bit nicer to my ear. So I went with that. Then the next thing I've got going on is split EQ. And I've mentioned this before in my other videos. This is, one of my favorite plugins when it comes down to kind of transient elements in a mix. So drums, percussion, all of those kind of instruments where it's kind of quite, it just adds this kind of, it allows you to control it in split EQ. And that's kind of really important for me. So, with this one here, I'm just adding more transient around 63 hertz, doing a 2.4 dB boost. So I'm just adding a little bit more oomph to the kick drum. So if we have a listen with this on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. You can really hear that's adding a lot of attack to the kick drum. So the first kind of two plugins that, I'm doing is EQ and transient shaping. And that's just to get the kick drum, the sample that they sent me into a place where it kind of feels good to me in my ears. It feels strong, it feels punchy, and that's a really good place to start. So that's what I like to do. Then I go into some Spectre. Now the Spectre in this is adding kind of, how I took the 1K out of around 1K on the EQ. I'm actually boosting it with saturation in this plugin, and that's just because there were some frequencies that I didn't like within the actual kick sample itself, and I took it out, and then I'm using Spectre to kind of bring that in a little bit and just kind of add a little bit more flavor at that 1K area. So with this on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. So you can hear there, it's very subtle, but it's just adding that little bit of top and click to the kick that I felt that was needed to get this kind of kick to sit well with the bass. Then the last plugin I've got on here is the Neutron 4, and I'm just using this again for a little bit more transient shaping. It's very, very subtle. I didn't actually add any attack because I've already done that in the split EQ plugin, but what I did do is I felt when I was playing it with the bass, and you'll hear when I play it with the bass, is I felt that the kind of the sustain of the kick was becoming too long for the bass, and it was sounding muddy to me. So what I did was I just took some sustain down, as you can see, minus 1.2. So it's very subtle stuff, but it just adds kind of a bit more control in the low end on the kick. So if we have a listen with that on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. So again, very subtle, but it's just really shaping that kick to how I like it. Then if we have a look at the bass along with that, now there's two bass parts. You've got, one bass part here, which looks like a log drum. Let's have a listen to what that is. So, it's kind of going off the kick, it's in between the kick, it's kind of creating a melody, between the kick drums, which is really nice. So if we have a look at kind of how I'm processing that along with the kick drum. So we've gone through the kick drum processing. Let's now unsolo that and just solo this bass sound on its own, and let's kind of look at the process. So as far as plugins go on the synth bass, I've just got some pull tech going on, adding some 60 hertz, and that's adding some click to that. So if we actually have a listen with this on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. Again, it's just adding that little bit of kind of oomph and punch and giving me a little bit of energy. And then after that, we go into some EQ. So I decided to do some additive EQ first just to get into a place where I liked it. And then here I'm doing some subtractive EQ with the Pro Q3. I know there is the Pro Q4 now, which came out a couple of days ago, but I haven't got around using that yet. So we're on the Pro Q3 for this mix. But here I'm just taking out frequencies that I felt like were kind of causing too kind of many problems with the bass. So it's all about the relationship between the kick and the bass, and these frequencies here were causing problems. So if we actually have a listen to the frequencies that were causing problems. And then if we have a listen with this on and off, it will be very subtle. You can hear it kind of just cleans it up very, very slightly, but it does make a big difference. And then underneath that, we've then got the 808. Now the 808 is, let's just have a listen to what that sounds like with my processing. So, it's a very, very low 808, and I need it to have that energy. So if we look at the first plugin that I've got going on, I'm just using the Voice of God, very popular plugin. Leslie Brathwaite told me about that plugin. He said, just use it on 808s and bass, and it always just makes everything sound bigger. So here we are, I'm using it on this mix. If we just take this plugin off and let's just have a listen to the Voice of God only, you'll hear this is actually creating a lot of kind of energy in that lower kind of 40 hertz frequency range. So if we have a listen with this on and off, you'll hear it, what it's doing. Now, if you're on a phone or a laptop or, kind of earbuds, you may not hear that as clear as if you're on a studio system where you can really hear that kind of really lows of the lows in the low end. But the next plugin is actually because of that reason. What I wanted to do is, I've created this kind of 808 now. It sounds really nice, it sounds really low, sounds really punchy. And that's great if you're on, you're in a club and you've got huge PA systems and you can, hear everything in detail. But a lot of the time we're consuming things on earbuds, or we're listening on our phone or Macs, laptops. And so the 808 is not going to punch through when it's that low. So what I like to do is I like to add some distortion, and I'm talking 0.1 of distortion. So if we have a listen with this plugin on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. Again, very subtle, but it does go a long way. So again, you can hear there, as I say, it's, very, very minimal stuff, and there is not much going on whatsoever. But, those little things do add up across the mix, and it makes it sound great in the end. So that's why I'm doing all of this. Now, those two basses, I then want to control them as one. Now, I could have just individually have controlled them, and then I've just, that would have been it. But I wanted to go that step further. And what I like to do is I like to kind of, I guess, food group things. Some people like to do it, some people don't. But I like to kind of put both my basses together in one bus, and it just gives me flexibility, and it just allows me to control both the basses as one whole kind of bass sound. I want those basses to work together, and that's why I did. So if we just have a listen now to both the basses as one, so we can hear what it sounds like together. Now, as I said earlier, you can kind of hear it's like syncopated. The 808 is playing, and then in between the 808 notes, you've got the log drum, the higher bass playing, and that's kind of adding the melody, the tonal aspect of that kind of low end in the mix on top. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to process them together. So now we've got them working individually with the kick drum, and then now what I want to do is now make the whole thing as a whole work together with the kick. So the first thing I did was I added some kind of overall EQ to the kind of the bass group, and you can see here I felt like the mix was a little bit bass heavy, and again, this move would have been when I was playing it with the kick and the whole mix together, and I felt like there was just a little bit too much kind of build up in that low end, and I kind of did a high shuffle all the way up to around 178 hertz. Very subtle, it's only 3.5 dB, just a bit more than that, and that's just kind of, again, taking out some low end, cleaning it up, and you could argue I probably could have done it on the individual tracks, but I didn't. I did it on the group. It felt right and it worked, so that's why I went with it. So if I just take all of the other plugins off and we just listen with this plugin on and off, you'll hear what it's doing. And as you saw there, I'm doing some dynamic EQ around 37, and that's because, as I said earlier, the voice of God is adding around that kind of 40 hertz, and I just felt that I loved it in certain parts, but when they were playing together, again when it was playing with the kick, I felt like around 37 hertz, again there was a bit too much of a build up, but I didn't want to just take 37 hertz out because I didn't want to lose that kind of oomph of the bass. So what I did was I did dynamic EQ, and this is just allowing me to dip. So every time there's a resonant frequency around 37 hertz, it just ducks it ever so slightly, and you can see kind of the way that this dip, I guess, is moving. It's doing the dynamic EQ processing. If you take a look very closely, you can hear it. Now, when I just soloed the headphone part there, just to solo that frequency, you're not going to hear that unless you're on a big system, but you get the point. You can see that it's just very, very small moves, and it's just giving me that control in the low end. Then the next thing I decided to do, which is kind of one of my go-to things to do, is use a Pro MB, and I always have done, and I always love using a Pro MB kind of somewhere in the plugin chain on the bass group, because this is just like, what I said earlier, it's a bit like my massage tool. It just allows me to kind of really smooth out that low end. Everyone always wants to control the bass, they want a bass heavy mix, especially in hip hop stuff, or you want to have that bass kind of really forward in the mix, but you're fighting one loudness, you're fighting it being muddy, you're fighting it just generally being bass heavy in general. And I feel like I can really get the bass loud in mixes by adding this plugin on at the end, because if you have a listen to or have a look at what this plugin is doing, if we just solo the band, and what that's doing is all of the frequencies all the way up until around 400 hertz ish, it's just massaging it down. So when it's becoming too much in the mix, it's kind of pulling it down. So it's creating like an even low end, and not like an odd low end where you will get some resonant frequencies that are poking too much, because don't forget I controlled it with the Pro Q3, and then now I'm just controlling the whole thing up until around 400 hertz, and it's just kind of bringing it down when it's causing too much to my liking. That's really, really kind of a key plugin for me. So if you don't take anything else away from this video, please take this plugin away and add it kind of to the end of your bass bass group, because it does a lot of wonders, especially when you're trying to get your mix loud, and all of that great stuff. Then the next thing I do, which is kind of a new thing for me, any mixers or producers that know me know that I've never been a huge Soothe guy, but when Jason Joshua came out with this Mix of the Masters and he was using this, I was kind of surprised at how kind of quick this plugin was at doing the sidechain to the kick. So what I've done is I've done, I won't go through this trick in detail because he's already shared what he does, but I just send the kick to a bus. In this case, it's on bus 35, and then I go to Soothe, create the sidechain, Soothe, make sure this is on sidechain is turned on, and again it's frequency dependent, so I've got it kind of all the way up to low mid around 500 hertz just above, and every time that kick is hitting, that bass is ducking. So if you have a listen with the kick and the bass together, now let's have a listen if I bypass this Soothe. Again, it will be subtle, but you'll hear the difference. For me, it's just giving me that extra kind of 2% when I'm controlling that kick and that bass. It's allowing me to get that kick louder because Soothe is reacting so fast. It's just giving me that, again, that flexibility to be able to kind of really push up the low end and push the kick, but without it becoming kind of an overload of kick and bass. And, again, controlling it with Soothe. And, it's a great processor. So I've been doing that a lot lately. So they are the two kind of they're the two main techniques that I use to control it within the mix. Now, the next technique is using it on the mix bus. And what I mean by that is, you've controlled the low end in the kick, you've controlled the low end in the bass, you've now controlled the low end with the kick and the bass together. Now, we're looking at the context of the overall mix together. Now, you may have guitars, synths, and all of that stuff has bass information in it. Now, you could high pass EQ, and that's what a lot of people do, and that's great, and I do that too. But what happens is you can also get a build up of kind of rumble and a build up of just low end in general, especially when there's acoustic guitars in the mix and all of that great stuff. And so what I rely on quite heavily. Again, some people may argue doing multi-band compression on the mix bus is a bit of a kind of cop out, but it allows me to, again, push for loudness. It allows me to control frequency so things aren't popping out in the mix. And to me, it just creates a smoother mix overall. And when I'm talking about the mix bus processing, I'm talking very, very minimal stuff. I'm talking, half a dB, if that, maybe a dB at max. But the way that I did on this track, I won't go through the whole mix bus because I've done it before in other videos, which you can check out. But if you look here at the dynamic section, up to around 100 hertz, I've got basically a dynamic compressor multiband on there, and it's just basically pushing that low end down on the overall mix. So if we just have a listen to the instrumental, and you can kind of see what it's doing. So, as you heard there, to me, it's just really kind of clamping down on the dynamic of that low end, just, up to around 100 hertz. And again, it's subtle, but, sometimes what I do is I'll hit this and I can change the gain so I can literally control the whole low end of the whole mix together, including the vocals and everything. And it just, to me, it just makes it more kind of a controlled way in the mix to really kind of hone in, I guess, on getting that kind of bass right in the overall mix together. And again, it's so important for loudness because obviously you've got the loudness war and all of that stuff. Whether you like it or not, it's there. And I do find that by adding dynamic processing you know, like a multi-band on the mix bus, it will allow you, because you're controlling that low end, and you know, every time it pokes out, it's pushing it down. It means then when you do, you know, use a limiter, you know, and clippers and all of that great stuff, it's, you know, you can really drive that a little bit more, and it's not going to crap out the limiter because the bass frequency is suddenly popping up on the chorus. Because if that was to happen in this mix, this multi-band would push that bass down. And so, you know, as you saw there, is all those small kind of ways of controlling the low end is what is going to you know, control the overall low end in a mix. So they are kind of my go-to things. So just to recap what we've done, you know, we've done some general EQ, then we've done some split EQ for some transient shaping, then we've done some spectre for some saturation, and then we've done some more kind of transient, but this time it's not for the attack, it's for the sustain, and then that's bussed out to the bass group. And then on the individual things, we've got some overall EQ to add sort of some body, some punch, and then again we're controlling resonant frequencies that we don't like in the mix, and that's the same for the 808 as well. Voice of God plugin, just adding those sub frequencies that we, you know, we like and we want to hear on big systems, and then we're adding the lo-fi for smaller systems. That then goes to a bus. EQ, control low end, multi-band, and then the soothe is sidechain to the kick, so every time that the kick hits, the bass then comes down. And then after that, we've then got the dynamic on the mix bus with Ozone. You could use, you know, Pro MB, you could use, you know, multiple things for that. But they are my kind of key takeaways that I, you know, control bass and low end in the mixes that I work on. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a comment as well down below. You know, tell me what you guys use, what plugins you're using, and also I'm always interested to know, you know, your process and how you control low end in your mixes. I really hope this helped, and I'll see you all again next week for another video.